Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm here with Laura McGladry. She's a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, mountain rescuer, and volunteer ski patroller. She also teaches at the University of Colorado in the College of Nursing.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I've heard you talk about the 5 principles or the 5 factors of incident recovery, some of which I think actually happen while you're on scene or while you're still engaged with the heightened state of arousal. But I think the overarching goal then is to decrease that arousal and then reestablish safety.
That's
Do you
right.
mind kind of moving the conversation a little bit into those? Because I think those 5 principles are extremely usable, and I think they're quite simple, but yet very powerful and usable for us as individuals and as a team.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, our curriculum director, Todd Schimmelfennig at Knowles, often says, you really just have to do what you're doing anyway. You just have to do them with intention. And I think that's at the heart of the why. We just need to know why this is helping. And then I think we would do it more because we're probably most of us are already doing it. So the first one is safety. So these are the 5 elements that came out of that consensus group where they said basically there's 5 things we know that everybody, even lay people, can do that help people and don't hurt them. So the first one they said was to reestablish safety. And so what that means to us in mountain rescue is, again, basically we're trying to tell the brain the worst is over. You made it. You don't have to keep surviving. You can come back down to safety. And so we primarily do that by reflecting safety, and we can actually just keep saying words like, now that you're safe, now that we're all here. I mean, it is incredibly, imagine how impactful it is for someone who's been lost in the dark and cold for 12 hours to see our headlamps coming through the woods. And here we are, we're jacketed, we're like, ready I mean, nothing says you made it. So really to bring that spirit of like, hey, you made it. Now that we're here, we can. Now that you're safe, you're safe. And to really take a minute to let that sort of land for folks. We also can help reestablish safety by protecting people from details that keep telling their brain it's happening again, it's happening again. So that literally could be something as simple as turning them away from the recovery on the slopes and facing the trees and facing you. It could be turning off radio comm or having someone else manage it so you can be in a quiet moment with them without them getting more details of the rescue. It could be shielding them from the helicopter spray. I mean, whatever would tell them they made it. It could be taking the clothing off that still has blood on it. We try and take those reminders away from folks so that their brains can finally recognize they made it.
As rescuers, how do you think we apply that? I mean, I hear what you're saying very specifically to the subjects, and I know down in Portland they actually had a subject where the team identified that the subject was a co-party to the actual individual who was either hurt or deceased. But I remember you explaining that they identified that this individual had been born witness to this traumatic event, and they treated this subject as if they had a psychological injury, and they did exactly what you're mentioning and tried to reduce the event for them, remove them from the event, reestablish safety. But I think as rescuers, this is where it gets a little tricky for us. Is we do come back after the mission. It tends to be 3:30 in the morning, and we pack our vehicles up and we go home.
That's right.
And I think as we talk through some of these principles, I think I might kind of poke at it a little bit to try to tease out what can we do or what should we be looking for? How should we be thinking about this from a team perspective and from individuals on the team?
Right. So a couple things there. I mean, from a team standpoint, you getting back to your tailgate and just having a moment together, especially if it was really impactful. We've been talking recently about having hot drinks or soup waiting, which would be this amazing psychological first aid moment, right? Because it seems simple, but you come back, there's something warm in your hand. People want to linger for 5 minutes. I mean, we are, and this gets into connection, candidly, but we are the ones who tell each other, you made it. we're back here, we made it to the cars, that's over. So some teams are actually thinking about rituals that, when I say rituals, meaning something that they always do, whether it's a hot wash thing, whether it's a shakeout, whether it's drinking soup, in that moment before you go home. Maybe it's a pause that say, that's over, we're going home now. So that can be very impactful. And the other thing that's known to be helpful from the early data was that we protect people from misinformation, which means the minute that we hear something bad happens, and this is true of everyone who hears someone they love is missing, their brains are geared to go to the worst possible scenario. If they're missing, they might be dead. If they're missing, it's bad. If it's a broken leg, it's a femur fracture. So when we can communicate the real facts of what happened, it actually protects people from creating stories that their neurons wire together and start to believe that can be very hard to unwind later. So on teams, when we talk about these hot washes or debriefs or whatever diffusing you like to call the after action review, we actually talk about making sure that the facts of what happened were there, including recently I was called on an event where something had happened that sounded terrible to a little person. What we realized was the story was terrible, but the little person did okay in the end. We needed to get to that part if we could, which was like, that was really impactful, but here's the details we know. They're in stable condition in a manual right now. Okay, good. They didn't die. Fine. I mean, anything we can. And so that's part of what we've built into some of that after action. If other people weren't there, we all get together. 2 teams were rigging something. 2 teams were doing this to get back and maybe doing a quick moment on what actually happened with facts. And in that moment, we just try and represent as much of the real and positive facts that we can. I don't mean that we're blowing smoke, but that can be very helpful for teams.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think, what's going through my mind, actually, I'm starting to kind of move even into one of the other aspects, which is connection. I think you were talking quite a bit about, establishing that safety, but I think that goes hand in hand, somewhat simultaneous with building the connection with the other individual. And obviously on rescue teams, we tend to have a pretty high level of connection with folks, unless they're maybe new to the team, and then we're in the formation stage of that connection. But for the most part, we go out climbing, we go out skiing, hiking, and do a variety of activities together, and we have that connection. And so I think, connection for me resonates quite powerfully for what we have on the team. But I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about that and kind of some of your thoughts around connection itself and what we might be able to glean and take back from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? So we talked about how watching something happen to someone else, it's not infrequent that I will hear about a climber who watched someone watch someone else's rope or belay system fail or something. When you watch that happen, your brain's actually going through the motions. We've seen this with mirror neurons now. It's not that you are kind of thinking about what's happening. Your brain's actually trying to leap into action, and it's going to feel like that's happening to you. So if the injury happens in that way, so amazingly does the recovery. So our level of connection is the greatest predictive factor in how well we're going to sustain and integrate trauma. That's a powerful statement. So on teams, what that means is if someone's listening and they're thinking, what is one thing I can do to help us do better or take more, integrate trauma in real time, I don't know how to say it, or resource the team, this connection piece may or may not be something that's happening socially. It's so important as a team because your team is so well connected, but some people listening might be on a team who doesn't spend time or they don't feel super safe with the team or saying, hey, I have an idea and it got shot down or whatever. So to really put an emphasis, if your team can be the people you want to come home to, so much of the work is already done. And so if you were going to invest in one thing on a team to create your resilience to traumatic exposure, I would say spend more time together. Do your knots and brats and rig things together. Go to each other's birthday parties. Know each other. that connection alone at the trailhead or when something big goes down, that is what is going to predictably sustain you and help you take on more things in real time. And if you don't have it on your team, please make sure that you have it in your personal life and diversify. Because what also happens on teams is some teams only connect to each other, and the people in your life who are not on mountain rescue or search and rescue don't have access to that part of you. That means you can't go home and share what's happening, and it's a very universal experience. And so trying to make connection with the people who love you outside of the uniform is so protective as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that and bring up the family as well. I think it is a difficult endeavor to be able to come home and well, one, you probably don't want to explain, especially if it was a traumatic accident
Right.
that you were called out on. And then in general, I think it's, sometimes if the significant other or spouse or partner is also doing some of the work, then maybe it's a little bit easier. But in many cases, they're not part of the team or they're not in that community as well. So it's harder to explain what's been going on. I know on our team, we do try to have a number of events throughout the year where we bring family members together and we try to enjoy the team concept as an extended team and not just always, focused on, the members itself. But, that's obviously not easy and, it takes effort and, planning and whatnot. But I think, building connections within the team is great. Trying to understand how we can better leverage that to be able to help give us more capacity, I suppose, so that when some of these accidents or traumatic stresses happen, that we have that and, we've done the homework and laid the foundation to then be able to leverage it when we need it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's 2 so far of the 5. Which one do you want to jump onto next?
Well, so I actually think hand in hand with safety is calm.
Okay,
and
great.
So calm in essence is that gets at what you said about decreasing arousal. So in a study early on, they found that people who had elevated heart rates after extreme exposure a week out were more likely to go on to develop stress injuries like PTSD. And at the heart of that, the idea is if the fire's still burning, right, if you're still surviving, your body's paying the toll for that. And one of the ways you can tune into that is if your body a week out, if you're not sleeping, if you just can't come down, if you're still buzzing, that needs care. It's like your smoke coming from your engine when you're driving. Like, it's okay, but you need to stop and pay attention to that. So the intervention of calm is basically to use your own body and your own nervous system to help support other people in calming themselves down so they can decrease arousal and come back to that baseline. And again, sort of send out the all clear signal. So we can do that in a lot of ways. We can get people to physically stop moving. We often joke about, for those of us who get to use the patient assessment system and a stethoscope, maybe just take lung sounds and take a lot of them and take them real slow and have people take a really deep breath. You're already coming onto the scene, hopefully with a calm demeanor directive. Now, here's the trick. This one, you can't really cheat, because our first language that we learned, even before we learned to speak English or Spanish or whatever, was reading other human beings for our survival. So we learned to read our parents' cues before we ever learned to talk. So that language is actually the language of survival. So if you come on scene to someone in the middle of the night and you're thinking, this is really bad, it's starting to sleet, we still got to get down this rock front here, I'm by myself, I can't remember how to tie these knots, this is bad. And you come on scene to someone who's terrified and you're like, hey, everything's going to be fine, calm down, don't worry about it. They're going to read you and be like, everything does not seem fine. And that you're not going to achieve calm with them. So this is a really challenging one, because we have to actually find a way. We have to know that what's under the surface for us, the way we're talking, how scared we are, how panicked we are, how pressured, how we're interacting with our fellow rescuers, all of that is going to communicate either to them that things are safe and they made it, or that that we seem scared and they must be in really big trouble because they don't do what we do every day. So this is one where you might come on scene and think, I got to take a couple of deep breaths myself. Or this scene is really close to another one that's still bugging me. I'm going to let you go in first and talk to the patient first or the subject first, or do whatever it takes for us to put some effort around bringing the part of ourself who believes this is going to be okay to the scene with them, because that is such a powerful tool. People who are living in survival can't really understand what you're saying most of the time. It's like the adult on the peanuts, like wah, 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 wah. What they're really coding for is, am I going to make it? Does this seem really bad to you? And we communicate that with ourselves and our calm and our body. And there's nothing as powerful that we can bring to a scene to mitigate people's traumatic stress is that very thing. But it's the hardest.
Yeah, it is difficult. I know oftentimes when I do pull up to our base, and if the family's there or if a lot's going on, I'll actually sit in the car for like 30 seconds and try to just decompose and de-stress from the drive there. Maybe there was traffic, or I'm obviously just trying to get there, not speeding though. And then I think it's also true. There's been a number of times as we're approaching the scene or as we're approaching whatever the accident is, to just kind of take pause, and also to give the team the chance to sort of mentally get ready, because I think sometimes there's aspects that we need to do as individuals, but I think even formulating a quick plan, and understanding what roles are going to be dealt out to different team members helps put the team in a bit of a state of calm as well. But I like how you explain that, and I like how you phrase it as to be able to give us that capacity to be able to execute at a higher level by just taking a moment to kind of slow things down.
Right. And we all get permission to be human beings on those scenes. I mean, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. There's scenes that I will show up on that I just am completely overwhelmed. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't think, that's too close to home, whatever it is. I get permission to say, I'm going to go grab my pen, or I got to do whatever it is. You don't have to jump into that. Almost always there's an opportunity for a pause. And we do talk about this a lot in phase change too, where we think one thing's going to happen and it turns a corner and something totally surprising happens. Call it a phase change and say, this is a big deal. I got to get myself under, whatever sense of like, what we're really digging for there is a sense of, we've got this. I've got this. And it's okay to I love that you take time in the car. We've been working on meditation strategies too to sort of practice this, right? Like some capacity to get to a feeling of, I've got this, because I guarantee you, if you feel overwhelmed, that is the start of stress injury formation for you too. So you got to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and to take it a little bit of a sidestep here, because I think we've been talking a lot about incidents where somebody's been hurt, but I think there are other areas within the rescue work that we do that also pose quite a high level of stress. And on the rigging side of the house, we actually very diligently do take a pause before we run our systems, before we put ropes in motion. For this, I think for the exact same reason, to kind of validate everything's, as is, to do a bit of a rehearsal and kind of get everybody in the mindset that we're done setting things up. Now we're going to actually move ropes and move people.
Exactly right.
And so I think being able to also see that events that could happen in a rigging space, could become a near miss if you're not careful, could lead to stress injuries as well. And I just want to kind of comment on that and at least make mention that I think it's, there's a wide range of aspects that we're dealing with in the backcountry that are, that have high potential for being stressful.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you're pointing out the ropes part, because very few people it would be unlikely to make it through your rescue career if you do more high angle or ropes work to not have a couple times where you could say, yeah, that was way too close, or I took a risk there that was out of bounds, but I felt like I had to. So those can accumulate for us too, for sure.
Sounds good. Which You've got two left. I'm not sure which one
Okay,
you'd.
let's see.
I guess it's a
So
50-50 shot. We could flip a coin.
sure. So we've talked about safety, calm, and connection.
Hmm.
Self-efficacy or agency or engagement is another one. And the idea there is if stress injuries occur in a state of helplessness, right? When I hear folks, sort of someone comes to see me clinically and I get to pull the thread on the story that, or often it's not just one story or it's cumulative, there is an element of helplessness. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help them. I couldn't save them. I couldn't get myself out. And so, if that is part of stress injury formation, then getting people involved in their own rescue is incredibly powerful to reverse that. So, what that means is that I think I've admitted to being at this for a lot of years. When I first started doing search and rescue many years ago, it was like, we're the rescuers. Our job is to save everybody, and their subject's job is to lay there and be rescued. And I think we're moving away from that to say, we're a team. This is your rescue. You got to be a part of getting yourself out of this. Can you hold the ropes while I do this? Can you hold my pen? Can you write this down? Can you remember your vital signs? Can you remember the last trailhead? We need you. You're going to get yourself out of this. And that plays out in 100 different ways. And sometimes it's controversial. Sometimes this is the family, it could even be a recovery, but engaging the family in their own family. And this is controversial, but what I mean by that is not just I think sometimes we meet people that we consider to be traumatized and we want to do everything for them. And what they really need is to be engaged often, unless they're just totally overwhelmed, because that engagement gets the cortex back online. It gets the cortex driving again, and it's another way to actually tell the brain, you made it, now we're problem solving. So we just look for every effort we can to let people know what's happening, to see how we try and look for ways that they can help. If it's a little kid, I will do everything I can to invent jobs for them that are meaningful so that they can be helping me, because that engage and helping their parents or helping the person that they're with, because it's so protective for their brains. And
this is one I do want to talk a little bit about, how do we bring this back into some of our teams, and how do we engage with folks, on a peer level to help do this as well? Do you have any tips or thoughts? And I might ask another question depending on what you say.
oh, good. Let's see if I get
Okay.
it right the first time. So, yeah, absolutely. On teams, people having a sense of, being engaged and my contribution is important here is tremendously helpful. And so that actually gets to the new trainee who has an idea, who wants to carry that out, who has something to offer, or who, after something that was incredibly impactful, gets to be a part of problem solving. We recently had a conversation on the ski patrol that I work with, about self-efficacy. We just decided that our after action review was actually a means for self-efficacy, meaning, wow, we didn't expect that to happen and it was really hard. What can we do in the future? What can we do right now that will change this outcome in the future, so that if this ever happens again, we're ready for it? And so even some of the operational review that we do, but I think as it applies to stress injury, recognizing stress injury and potential, and doing things like being the person who has the family dinner next time and who reaches out to someone else because it's helping them, that's part of your efficacy too. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking about, but getting teams engaged in their own rescue. Maybe a team finds out that they are in the orange. The people who step up to the plate and decide they want to get their team out of the orange, that actually is helping and protecting those people, because they're engaged in something important and meaningful.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think one other aspect I've heard you talk about before is that as rescuers, it's really difficult for us to understand that we may need some help ourselves, or
Mm-hmm.
that we may be in a position where we need to be a little bit more aware of kind of what's going on. And I think the way you talked about it was that there's this notion that as a rescuer, if you let on that you have, an issue, or that you let on that you might have a stress injury, that it puts you in a position of now not being a rescuer.
That's
You're
right.
essentially, you've removed yourself from the very thing that you've been trying to, work with. And I think that can be a challenging aspect for folks, when you're on a team like this. And I think that the term you actually used was, being voted off the island. There's this feeling that, I might get voted off the island. And, I think in our society, that is, obviously there's a TV shows where that kind of thing happens, and we've put a lot of emotional effort behind that. That's not good. Whereas being on a team, obviously the best thing would be to kind of pull the person back in and remind them that they're still a functioning part of that team, even if they do, have a mission that they go on that ends up causing some stress for them over a period of time.
Yeah, I think this is why it is so important that we change our language and recognize these as injuries, because time and time again, law enforcement and fire, what I hear over and over again is, I used to really like and respect that person, and then, can I say a bad word? It's okay.
I think so. I think you said one already. So
did I? I've already blown it. But I'm just repeating what people say to me in these settings. I used to really respect them, and then they became an asshole, and I don't want to be around them anymore. And I would like to follow that thread a little bit farther and be like, well, does asshole look like this? Is it isolated? Everything's a problem. Short fuse. Relationships are falling apart. Can we call that stress injured? Because if someone got injured in a fall and then had behaviors related, they were limping, they couldn't climb, we would not likely vote them off the island. But if they had these behaviors that they were pushing people away because they were in so much pain and not showing up to things or trying to control everything, we would vote them off the island. And for reasons I understand. However, if we changed our perspective on what that was, and we could say, man, this person is incredibly impacted. Can we connect again? Can we reach out? Is there something else? Because the only way that person is really likely to make it out of that situation is through connection. So the one thing they need the most is the one thing that in our culture currently is taken away, because we don't want to be around them anymore, because they're so hard to be around, but it's because they're injured. And we would never do that with a physical injury. And that's why I think our language here is so incredibly important.
Yeah. And speaking of language, I actually had on my notes the exact thing that you're talking about. I was trying to decide if I should use the word asshole as well while we were chatting on the podcast.
So I'm sorry to everyone. It's just the language that's currently used in law enforcement and fire. We are not cussers ourselves, are we, Nick?
No, but well, sometimes when it's necessary. But I think it's a great point, because as we operate in the red or in a heightened state, maybe it's the orange for quite some time, it does affect our personality, and it does turn us into somebody who we weren't when we first started. And then it becomes the norm for us, or for, an individual, hopefully not for me, but, and I think it becomes more difficult for people then on the team to, especially when people are coming in and they're newer to the team, but you become the person that people don't want to kind of operate with or work with. And people kind of tend to say, oh, they're so-and-so, and they'll go a different direction, or, hey, they're forming teams, like, let me jump on this other team over here so that I don't have to be with them. And I think that has the ability to erode the team fairly quickly. And obviously it's fairly detrimental to the individual.
Right. I mean, I think that's the fairest thing to say, is that if it's terrible to be around them, the way it feels to be around them is actually the way it feels to be them. And so the greatest loss is for people to say, I don't even know what happened to me. I'm not this person. Why am I like this? But I can't see a way out. And so that's why we need to know that the continuum actually can move in both directions. And there actually really is a way out. But I will say this, once you're in the red, it is incredibly difficult to just like crawl your way out on your knees. Just what really tends to need to happen is more support, whether that's professional support, substance abuse support, therapeutic relationship, whatever it is. It'd be like having a shattered femur and deciding you were going to go home and take care of it on your own. You might, but the outcome's not going to be what it would if you might be willing to reach out.
but without so much doom and gloom, let's kind of shift over to hope, because I think that's the last one that we have.
Great.
And we can kind of talk about the positive side of what we can still do.
Great. So the last one, hope, is a little bit less tangible, but it's no less based on the evidence guidance of these, like, the world's experts on this. And in essence, the idea is just maintaining a sense that things can and will get better. And so the way that that looks on a rescue, if you're if this is public facing and relating to subjects, that you maintain with them a sense of hope, and basically you're reflecting back to them positive and true things that they may not be able to see for themselves because of how clouded or terrified that moment might seem to them. So it might look something like reflecting how well trained your fellow rescuer is. Like, I might say, like, I understand it's dark and I know how cold you are and how scary this is. And I got Nick with me, and this guy has been hanging out of helicopters for years, and he's like one of the best ropes guys we have on our team. So if you had to be out here tonight, you picked the right night, because I've been doing this for a bazillion years too, and I teach wilderness medicine. So, and I have dark chocolate, whatever it is, like that they feel a sense of camaraderie between us. That gives people a tremendous sense of hope when their rescuers actually seem to care about each other and want to be rescuing. When you know that these are experienced rescuers, and the deal with hope is that you can't just come up with a bunch of things that are like, I know it's the middle of the night. I know that no one knows where we are. I know that you have a bleed that I can't control, et cetera, et cetera. All this, like you said, doom and gloom, and then be like, but don't worry, Nick's here, and whatever I just said. What we have to do is actually get capture so that they understand that we understand how serious it is for them. So we kind of bear witness to that, and then give them some facts that are true, which is to say, again, we people know where we are. We know we're expecting a helicopter by dark. We have an incredible ropes team. This injury isn't what it could be. Whatever you can find to reflect positive and true facts to them, that helps them maintain in their brain, candidly, again, a sense that, and it supports a worldview that things can and will get better. And so that's at the heart of why we do it.
I think that's about all the time we have right now, but this has been a great discussion. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.